a growing paradox in the modern world. As communication technology explodes, the true distance between people risks widening further. A society where a seemingly simple "thank you" becomes the symbol of a silent revolution. Here, tiny gestures, seemingly trivial acts of care, possess more viral power than multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns. Can we truly build an economy based on gratitude and kindness when the entire world is racing for metrics, profits, and speed? Let's reconsider. The deepest relationships aren't forged in boardrooms, but in those small, seemingly insignificant moments of sharing. Those moments that seem entirely unrelated to work. When someone offers help without expecting anything in return, provides sincere advice during difficult times, or extends kindness without demanding immediate reciprocation. If these actions could be scaled to thousands, even millions of customers, how would businesses transform? Pioneers once believed that technology would only accelerate the sales process, while trust and emotion would forever remain beyond the reach of likes or follows. But the truth is turning around. Buyers aren't just choosing products, they're choosing the emotions and connections woven into every brand. A complaint on social media, a disgruntled status update, or even a publicly shared "thank you" all possess the power to alter the destiny of an entire company. Herein lies the problem. When all businesses can reach customers on a massive scale thanks to technology, what truly determines who survives long-term? Is it simply about running more aggressive ads, offering steeper discounts, or is it, in fact, a race to see who can build genuine relationships, who dares to prioritize kindness and gratitude above all else? Even when no one is watching, try asking yourself, if one day all brands become smart, convenient, and affordable, what will be the sole reason customers choose to return, or even be willing to defend a brand's name against public opinion? It could be a personalized emotion, an experience that exceeds expectations, or simply the feeling of being heard and acknowledged amidst a sea of strangers. The deeper one delves, the clearer it becomes. Old values, once thought obsolete dedication, genuine care, a timely "thank you," are now the most valuable assets in the digital age. A new economy is silently taking shape, where power lies not in marketing budgets, but in the ability to make each individual feel like the most important person in the world. So, if gratitude is the most sustainable currency of this era, what would happen if it spread to every customer, every partner, every community member? Is it possible that the future of business isn't found in financial statements, but in the heart of every person who has received a genuine thank you? Once upon a time, the world operated like a small neighborhood. Market-goers knew vendors by sight. Children grew up under the caring gaze of their elders. Praise or criticism about someone would spread within days, reaching the ears of all involved. In those days, every nod, every apology carried weight, for it decided who was welcomed and who was cast aside. Then everything changed. Car engines roared. Highways opened, supermarkets sprang up. Familiarity vanished slowly, like steam dissipating from a hot cup of coffee. Customers walked into stores. No one knew their names, only the amount they paid. Yet, deep down, people never stopped yearning to be seen, to be heard. No matter how many eras passed, that fundamental human desire simmered like an underground spring. Then one day, screens lit up, keyboards clattered, and the small world returned, but in an unprecedented form. The old neighborhood transformed into a giant network, where people once again told stories, asked questions, debated, laughed, got angry, and invited each other to buy new things. What was once considered private was now written, shared, and amplified. No longer did people need to sit in a coffee shop to express themselves. A single brief message sent could instantly be felt and responded to. Businesses, accustomed to operating from on high, were suddenly startled. The voice now came not from dazzling billboards, but from the small stories of everyday individuals. A single complaint could reach hundreds of ears in moments. A kind gesture, recounted by just one person, was enough to make others curious and seek it out. Instead of controlling information, people had to learn to listen, instead of trying to impose. Now, dialogue was essential. The face of power had shifted. When people realized their voices could resonate far, they began to use them. They asked, they demanded, they compared. They wanted a genuine handshake, even through a screen. They wanted a sincere apology, even if just a line of text. And businesses were forced to accept this. They couldn't evade it, couldn't hide behind glass walls. To survive, they needed to step down, stand alongside, and kindly address each person by name. This change wasn't created by technology. It merely exposed what had always existed. People want to be treated like humans. Every piece of feedback, every conversation, no matter how small, carried the same impact as in the old days. When a local shop disappointed someone, that news would reach their friends, their parent groups, and the merchant would lose 10 more customers. This effect was now multiplied by the speed of connection, creating a vortex that suffocated anyone standing outside. So some observed, shuddered, and wondered, could genuine sincerity truly extend to thousands, to millions of people? The answer emerged from these very conversations. An individual could connect with another simply by asking, "Are you okay?" A conversation would then unfold. Seemingly small, it turned out to alter perceptions. If this happened often enough, a business would become a familiar face, no longer just a sales machine. This fundamental truth applied even to those who had long denied it. For years, they were accustomed to controlling things with policies, reports, and cold, impersonal language. But when the world began to talk again, genuinely, spontaneously, to connect, the old models suddenly became dry and lifeless. The proof lay in simple feedback that made entire organizations bow their heads. People realized that what was once considered weakness was, in fact, strength. Just one small example. A consumer previously denied a simple request. That dissatisfaction would either fester internally or be whispered among a few friends. But now, just one message sent could become a wave, reaching someone thousands of miles away. Hidden beneath this inconvenience was a lesson. Every interaction has consequences, good or bad, depending on how people are treated. Managers tried to resist using old formulas, but were eventually forced to admit there was no longer any place to hide. The only way forward was to step into the midst of the conversation itself. As long as they pretended, they would be exposed. Because sincerity has its own unique scent, like the warmth of a hand holding yours, it cannot be faked without a genuine heart. So the new world laid down an old rule: everything begins with care. If someone asks you a question, answer with attention. If you see someone mentioning you, step forward. No need for flowery language, just a clear attitude containing a very human seed. The yearning to know, I am seen on this journey. Many once believed that technology pushed people apart, but ironically, it is now drawing us closer in a different way. It doesn't erase the coldness of the system, but it creates cracks for emotions to seep through. In this new space, businesses are compelled to recall the ways of old markets, seeing each person, listening to every word, understanding what remains unspoken. And thus, a circle closes. The new brings us back to the old, but larger, deeper, more complex. People stand at a crossroads, both fearful and realizing this is an opportunity for transformation if they dare to step in. Accepting the challenge of self-control will reveal a reward ahead, not revenue, but trust. And from trust, revenue will follow. As conversations spread, some still stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, as if the waves would simply pass them by without touching them. They believed this new world was merely a fleeting mist that would soon dissipate. A conference years ago provided a vivid illustration. In a room full of people in neat suits, a voice asserted clearly that online buying and selling would never become a serious business. The entire audience burst into laughter. Confident nods sealed what seemed obvious. Only a few silent glances, unspoken yet questioning. What if that very joke turned out to be the future? I remember that silence vividly because it revealed a paradox. The most confident individuals are often the most blind to change. They don't lack intellect, only the ability to see beyond the current perspective. In their minds, there's always a thin line, like a cable's edge. This side is familiar, that side is vague. Whenever something new appears, they retreat to the safe side, awaiting proof. But by the time proof arrives, the new thing is no longer new. Opportunity has already changed hands. That demarcation line wasn't on a beach, it was in the hearts of business people. It made them believe that the past guaranteed the future. Yet, reality proved brutally different. Stores once bustling were now only memories, while names once dismissed as jokes had subtly found their way into every consumer's wallet. What confused many wasn't failure, but the sheer speed. The new didn't knock slowly, it rushed in like a gale before anyone had time to prepare. Those who saw this earliest were often not the gray-haired veterans, but those who felt the subtle shifts. They understood that life couldn't be neatly divided into online and offline because all emotions were intertwined. An online call to action could pull people out of their homes. A bad experience could become a shared story in minutes. What many called virtual was, in fact, where the real was being decided. But in many offices, opposition still echoed. They claimed the new was hard to measure, that one shouldn't bet on what others didn't yet understand. People clung to what could be presented on paper. They waited for the right time, even though that time was now asterisk. The cycle repeated. Before cars appeared, everyone believed horse carriages would last forever. Before digital connectivity exploded, everyone believed physical stores were king. Each time, history just smiled. I've often seen the eyes of those steering old systems. In them, there was not only pride, but also the fear that others wouldn't comprehend the significance of changing course. They were afraid their beliefs would become a laughingstock. So they said no, not because they didn't understand, but because they hadn't dared to let go of what they were holding. That hesitation was very human, but it was precisely what caused them to fall behind as the wheel of history turned. The interesting thing is that this change doesn't demand anyone to dismantle everything they've ever known. It merely asks them to erase the mental boundaries in their minds. Don't think the world belongs only to where you can physically touch. Because for the first time, exchanges, reactions, and shades of emotion are spreading across vast distances, yet still making the recipient feel close. That's what old shops once had and then lost, and now it's returning through a different path. If someone pauses long enough to listen, they will recognize a call to discard old classifications because people have changed where they converse. Customers are no longer sleeping in advertisements. They are talking to each other elsewhere. While businesses were still debating whether to show up there, others had already sat down, struck up conversations, built relationships, and new habits were forming. People chose places where they felt responded to, broadly speaking. This change is like a test. It asks, do you dare to step to the other side of the sand line? Do you have the courage to appear in uncertain territory? Because that's how everything truly began. The first person to sell online was once ridiculed. The first to respond to customers via message was seen as redundant. But it was precisely those initial steps that forged a path for others to follow. There's another paradox. The more one waits for enough data, the more opportunities are lost. The most vibrant things often appear before the data can catch up. If someone waits until everyone believes, their role will merely be that of a follower. By then, the advantage isn't being a pioneer, but a survivor. And survival is not victory. And then, there came a time when people realized that separating online and offline life was an illusion. Life had merged into one. A relationship could begin with an interaction, lead to a handshake, and then become a purchasing habit. No channel is virtual if it creates real emotion. And that emotion, in turn, leads people back to the oldest concept, trust. In that landscape, some still hesitated, but others had already stepped forward. They didn't just show up, they interacted. They viewed every reaction as a signal to adjust their course. They responded to praise with gratitude and to criticism with an answer. They understood that if the sand line once blocked them, now was the time to erase it and move forward. Not everyone crossed that line at the same time, but those who didn't would be buried under the sand. Those who stepped across, whether slowly or quickly, all realized they stood where real conversations truly took place. Upon entering this new territory, it wasn't just the skeptics who held back. There were also those proud of their own acumen, individuals who had correctly predicted many trends, yet surprisingly retreated the furthest. They dismissed all the conversations happening out there with a series of very clever arguments. They claimed efficiency couldn't be measured, that the crowd's chatter was just a fleeting fad, that their customers didn't care about such things. They argued their time was too precious to spend on revenue plans. These statements sounded plausible. Who wouldn't want to see clear numbers before acting? But the flip side of such sharpness is that it makes people build walls to protect themselves from the unpredictable. The more accustomed someone is to formulas, the more averse they become to anything lacking one. They believed they were being rational, but in reality, they were just afraid of losing their sense of control. Looking within those rejections, what emerged was not a lack of understanding, but fear. Fear that new decisions would shake the structures they had built. Fear that if they opened up to converse with each individual, they would have to confront unforeseen demands. Fear that the world they once controlled with spreadsheets would transform into an elusive dialogue. The humorous part is that they dismissed what was happening right before their eyes because they chose to view it through the lens of the past. They observed a few superficial campaigns and concluded that talking to consumers yielded nothing. It was like someone holding a ball without practicing, running onto the field, and then blaming the sport when they lost. They didn't want to admit that the problem lay in their approach. This blindness became even more apparent with the living examples around them. Names once considered pillars gradually dwindled, while those dismissed as casual and chatty expanded their influence. Imposing bookstores that once dominated boulevards vanished, while places people thought were just for fun became trusted spots before making a purchase. It wasn't that books disappeared, but how people sought them out had changed. I once witnessed an ironic scene. A young man stood at an electronics counter, holding a game console, but didn't ask the staff for help. He typed a few lines on his phone, waiting for a response. Just a few minutes later, friends scattered across different locations messaged back their advice, instantly determining his purchasing decision. His eyes lit up, not because of an advertisement, but because someone he knew had just endorsed his choice. Those who denied this conversation weren't lacking information. They simply lacked the ability to accept that their power had shifted from the boardroom and into the palm of every individual. They still insisted that neighbors didn't affect sales, while neighbors were now an entire invisible network. People were talking about them in places they weren't even present. The reasons for rejection piled up. We don't have time to talk to everyone. It's not suitable for our industry. We don't want to be criticized publicly. But all of it came down to one crucial point. They didn't want to break down the wall of isolation they had come to rely on. That wall once helped them control the narrative. Now it prevented them from seeing how different the world had become. The irony is that many of these very people once extolled the spirit of innovation, speaking of flexibility in business. Yet, when change touched them directly, that flexibility vanished. They would rather accept obsolescence than undergo cultural change. Many times I witnessed them clinging to old measurement methods like a drowning person desperately clutching a block of concrete, believing it to be a life raft. Yet not all sank. Some understood that one couldn't expect a clear roadmap in uncharted territory. They stepped into the fray of chaos and discovered that conversation wasn't chaotic, it was fertile ground. Every piece of feedback, every question, every thank you became a seedling. These seedlings connected to form a garden, and that garden became a place where others were drawn. Gradually, a truth emerged. Conversation isn't a cost, it's an advantage. Not everyone realizes it immediately. But once they've seen it, they can't go back. Once they've tasted the feeling of a stranger becoming a familiar face through just a few responses, once they've seen customers return simply because they were listened to, they understand that all spreadsheets pale before the power of a genuine relationship. Over time, many who once scorned such dialogue were forced to engage. They did so not because they wanted to, but because there was no other choice. When customer disappointment spread widely, when complaints became fires fanned by users, only then did they understand that silence was no longer a strategy. The ancients knew this, but it took humanity a century to realize again that conversation isn't a secondary element, it's a lifeline. That if a business previously survived without it like a person with one kidney, now to truly thrive, it must nurture that conversation like a heart. From this point, the world entered a phase of no return. The nuance in listening and responding became a condition for survival, and those who once scoffed finally had to ask themselves, perhaps what they had long dismissed was precisely what controlled their destiny. Every organization, big or small, always possesses its own distinct scent, not the fragrance of floor polish or coffee in a meeting room, but an indescribable feeling. Step inside, and you immediately know if this place values people or just metrics. Some places are as cold as stone, footsteps echoing in the hallway with no one turning to look. Others, with just a glance, convey that you matter. This difference isn't a product of chance. It starts with the person at the helm. You can't demand warm responses for customers if, even in internal meetings, people only communicate through commands. To make the outside world feel cared for, Those on the inside must first believe that care is a genuine value, not just a slogan to paste on a wall. If leaders value service as deeply as breathing, their way of speaking, empowering, and listening will become a silent message that everyone understands. But if they merely pay lip service and then turn away, the organization will learn to perform rather than to live asterisk. I've witnessed places where employee smiles were just a veneer. The moment a customer turned their back, their attitude would drop like a mask. They weren't callous, they simply weren't allowed to be genuine. They feared reprimand for using the wrong wording from a manual. They knew that if they spontaneously helped someone, they might be questioned why they didn't follow protocol. In such an environment, how could they possibly dare to converse with strangers from their heart? Meanwhile, elsewhere, it was entirely different. The leaders set a silent standard. Everyone had the right to listen, the right to make small adjustments if it made sense, the right to speak to customers in their own voice. No one needed permission to be kind. In that atmosphere, employees were no longer afraid to invest their emotions. They knew that if they felt something was right, the organization would support them. The change began here, not from flashy campaigns or advertising messages, but from a fundamental shift in the mindset of decision-makers when they stood up and declared, "We will live by respecting every individual." That statement was merely a spark. The fire would only burn if the dry leaves of old habits were gathered and ignited by consistent action. If left to chance, the fire would quickly die out. But if every small decision, every internal exchange, every reminder aligned with this principle, a culture would form. No one is fooled by slogans. People observe how their superiors respond to a customer complaint. They hear how leaders speak after a meeting ends when no one is taking notes. If care is just a performance put on for the outside world, it will vanish in a blink. Only when it is truly lived from within, by the leaders themselves, does it possess the power to pull the entire system in the right direction. In an era where consumers speak openly, old systems built on control are being shaken. When every word spreads instantly, you cannot build a closed, walled-off organization. To engage in dialogue with the world, you must build an internal environment where dialogue is respected. The paradox is that the more open you are with those inside, the more you can manage how those outside perceive you. Every story begins at the executive level. If leaders see customers as individuals deserving of respect, every policy will reflect that. They will hire people for their empathic instinct, not just their sales skills. They will reward actions that make others feel seen, rather than just those who hit sales targets. When the reward and punishment model shifts, the system's entire temperament changes along with it. I once saw an organization fail miserably because it rushed into online dialogue, forgetting that its internal team didn't believe in it. Their responses sounded artificial, like actors reading lines. Readers sensed it immediately and turned away. That organization thought the outside world was callous, but in truth, that perceived callousness merely reflected their own internal state. On the other hand, organizations that fostered a breathable environment gained something subtle. Employees were proactive. They didn't wait for orders to reply. They took responsibility because they believed their responses would be acknowledged. That's when customers felt a real person was talking to them, not a cold, pre-written script. Once the culture had formed, all external strategies found fertile ground. Traditional advertising would then no longer just aim to draw attention, but to open a door that led people into the conversation happening within. When they stepped in and were met with acceptance, they stayed. If they stepped in and found emptiness, they would leave as quickly as they arrived. The crucial point is that a system that knows how to say, "Thank you," cannot originate from the marketing department. It must begin with the courage of leadership telling their team that it's okay to care, okay to make mistakes in the process of caring, and okay to prioritize people over procedures when helping someone without needing formal authorization. This changes the organization's destiny because it awakens a repressed instinct, the desire to do the right thing, little by little. What was once invisible becomes easily audible. The organization's voice changes, and its presence in consumer conversations transforms. People realize there's a person on the other side, not just an answering machine. And from that state, it moves into an integration phase where traditional messages and new dialogue merge. Once the internal atmosphere shifted, the outside world began to reflect it, much like a first date where the initial handshake is merely a ritual, and the true connection lies in the conversation that follows. Many places believed that simply making a splash was enough. They ran campaigns as brilliant as fireworks in the night sky, capturing every eye. But when the fireworks faded, they turned away, leaving behind smoke and emptiness. I saw this happen repeatedly. Voices boomed from billboards, from large screens, from catchy slogans. But the moment someone responded, yearning for a conversation, they were abandoned, as if a singer stepped off stage just as the audience began to sing along. The opportunity lay in that very moment, yet they left, convinced their task was done. Meanwhile, the true meaning of resonance lies in its ability to lead people to another place, where interaction becomes the catalyst for connection. Imagine a beautiful advertisement. It's like the opening of a date. It grabs attention, opens hearts. But if there's no exchange afterward, that person will leave feeling disappointed. Here, traditional media is like the invitation, while the place where people converse is the space where relationships are formed. I once witnessed a campaign that made millions laugh, excitedly tagging each other to rewatch it. People expected the person behind it to step out and continue the dialogue with them. But instead, there was silence. The initial effect weakened like a wave hitting the sandy shore and dissipating. They thought that virality was self-sustaining, but anyone who has lived in a small neighborhood knows that if you initiate a conversation and then disappear, those left behind won't mention you again. However, there were also places that understood the stage was only the beginning. They used resonance to lead people back to their home, where they could greet each person individually. They let advertising perform the task of activating emotions, then used their dialogue network to keep those emotions alive. This wasn't a replacement, it was a pairing. Tradition extended its hand, and social media grasped it. Both pulled each other along. There's an interesting paradox. Many still stubbornly tried to demarcate these two worlds, as if one half of the story couldn't touch the other. They'd run a campaign and then consider it complete, failing to see that what they had just awakened was a real person waiting for a response. And so, consumers continued to talk among themselves, while businesses stood on the sidelines, observing conversations about themselves but not participating. But those who stepped into that conversation would realize something truly new. People don't need another performance, they need someone to stay after the show. A simple reply, if timely, carries more weight than 1,000 dazzling images. Because in that noisy world, what is rarer than light itself is presence. A brand not only needs to speak, but needs to listen as if its very existence depends on that conversation. Once this was understood, all campaigns suddenly changed roles. It was no longer a one-time call for customers to visit a store, but the beginning of a relationship. Those in communications began to see what they had previously overlooked. Their work didn't end when a campaign went viral, it had only just begun. Because a wave is only meaningful if it creates a shore to touch, and then from that shore, it can run back out to sea. In this space, subtlety reigned supreme. Leaders knew they couldn't just borrow the spotlight to appear brilliant, they had to roll up their sleeves and converse like ordinary people. Their answers didn't need to be perfect, just genuine. When someone asked about a product, they didn't send a cold link, but a thank you for the interest. When someone criticized, they didn't evade, but asked further to understand. And so, a silent division formed. Those who viewed the new world as merely a place to shout would lose their voice the moment the lights went out. Those who saw it as a place for connection would find their voices still resonating as night fell. Not because they spoke louder, but because they had listeners who truly pondered their words. This is not new. In the past, a good merchant didn't just hang a beautiful sales sign, they stood at the door, greeting every person who entered. If one only decorated the marketplace but didn't show their face, who would remember the shop owner? Today's dialogue network is simply an expanded marketplace. It doesn't change the fundamental nature, it merely amplifies an old need, to have someone respond. And from that realization, people enter a more challenging phase, understanding that more isn't always better. Every response needs to carry intent. Because if you reply like a machine, people will immediately know. No one wants to converse with a talking billboard. People want to encounter another human being with thoughts, feelings, and a heart. That is when intent becomes the anchor, and also where this journey leads us in the following reflections. Intent is the hardest thing to see, yet the clearest to reveal. It's like breath. No one sees it directly, but everyone feels it. When an organization steps out to converse with the world, every letter, every pause in anticipation of a reply reveals their true purpose. Some words are very polite but hollow. Listening to them, you know the speaker is merely performing a duty. Others are so simple, so ordinary, yet they make the listener feel deeply touched. I once saw places that believed their solution was productivity. They hired large teams to reply to many messages, training them to craft responses quickly. They thought speed was the ultimate truth, but the outside world doesn't respond to quantity, it responds to quality. An emotionless reply might maintain equilibrium for a moment, but a soulful response creates a widening circle. It doesn't just resolve a question, it leaves an imprint. Here's the problem. Many believe intent is a vague, immeasurable concept, but in reality, it is the core of every encounter. People don't demand expensive gifts from businesses, they just want to see that someone on the other side truly wants to help. A seemingly small question, "How else can I help?" if spoken with genuine attention, carries more power than grand, loud campaigns. The paradox lies here. Businesses are accustomed to pursuing scale, while the new world rewards subtlety. The more you try to show off, the easier it is to fall out of tune. The more you remain silent at the right moment, the more opportunities you have to make the other person pause. Sometimes, a timely "thank you" can astonish someone like an unexpected gift. It's not the material thing that amazes them, but the feeling, the realization that I am seen amidst the crowd in these anonymous online conversations. Sometimes I've encountered a beautiful image. Someone praised a product and suddenly received a reply, not with a link, but with a cheerful greeting, accompanied by a genuine question. The person who praised paused for a few seconds before their screen, then wrote more, as if they had just been invited into a private space. That is precisely the moment a relationship begins. No promotion is as swift as that feeling. So when an organization begins to astonish, not with fireworks, but with acute care, they open up a path few notice. They will remember what someone said weeks ago and bring it up at just the right moment. They will send congratulations when they see someone achieve their goals. These gestures are like a hand placed gently on someone's shoulder, letting them know they are more than just numbers in a ledger. Some places have applied this for a long time without even naming it. They know that people remember the smallest things. A timely embrace is more valuable than a timely check in the dialogue between a business and a customer. That embrace is replaced by presence. You see me, you hear me, you remember me. These three things are enough to open the heart of the person opposite. Upon realizing this, an organization will perceive a new form of responsibility. No perfunctory replies, no empty promises that vanish, no treating unexpected actions as mere tricks. Because a trick only works once. The more you try to turn it into a gimmick, the more its hollowness is exposed. Only when the intent is genuine do actions possess true vitality. Places that understood this no longer debated whether to maintain dialogue. They understood they were stepping into the world's largest neighborhood, where countless people conversed simultaneously. Failure wasn't in receiving a complaint, but in turning your back on it. Victory wasn't in someone buying again, it was in them recommending your name to others without being asked. Ultimately, this journey brings everyone back to a simple truth. Human nature hasn't changed. No matter how many tools technology offers, what people yearn for is the feeling of being treated like a human being. Whoever makes them feel that way will remain in their lives. Whoever disregards it will be quietly cast aside, not with noise, but with silence. So, in a seemingly complex world, its rule is remarkably simple. Begin by creating an environment where insiders dare to care, use the light of traditional invitation, then step into genuine conversation, not chasing quantity but seeking the deep quality of every action, and if possible, amaze with the smallest things others overlook. Victory isn't about momentarily capturing public attention. Victory is when people want to continue hearing your voice, even when the advertising lights are off. Once this is understood, everything changes. A business becomes a familiar friend, not a loudspeaker. A relationship becomes a true asset, not a data stream. The world has always been conversing, it's just that for many years, people forgot how to listen. Then one day, that sound became clear in short written messages. People talked about experiences, praised, criticized, expressed expectations. Some dismissed it as mere noise, but others recognized it as a door opening into the human mind. In a quiet corner, a complaint surfaced, just a brief sentence from someone who seemed tired, like a sigh in a crowded street. Few paid attention to it, most glanced and moved on. But there was one place that didn't consider it trivial. They stopped, they listened, they replied. That small exchange, viewed from afar, seemed insignificant. Yet it opened up a new journey, a few rounds of dialogue, a few questions, a few replies, ultimately leading to an unpredictable conclusion. A large, valuable contract emerged from someone who had merely intended to vent their frustration. What appeared here was not magic, but the subtlety of observation. By looking in places others neglected, by deciding to go where people were genuinely gathering, the door to business opened at its lowest point. Someone received a timely response, and instead of turning away, they turned back. A relationship formed from a small signal that, if ignored, no one would have ever known existed. Another corner of the picture wasn't a boardroom, but a small eatery. There, the owner didn't use a loudspeaker to call people, they used an invitation to converse. Diners weren't just customers, they became contributors, naming new dishes, asked about their meal. These encounters spread online, where people who had never even set foot in the restaurant felt as if they already knew its taste. Business effectiveness grew without the need for dazzling billboards. Instead, a community emerged where people called each other by habit, where the restaurant's name became a landmark in their memory. The difference between these two places lay in their scale, but their essence was the same. One sold complex technical services, the other sold burgers. Yet, both won with a seemingly simple act, listening and replying as if each person mattered. People often thought communication was only for soft service industries, but reality had reversed. Even the driest, most technical fields were now being decided by emotional presence. I remember the moment I realized this. It was like watching two seemingly unrelated streams converge into the same ocean. A large organization and a tiny establishment were both rewarded for choosing a path less traveled. They didn't pursue controlling the narrative. They stepped into the narrative itself when the people they interacted with felt seen. Opportunities opened up in ways no one could have predicted. But the journey didn't end there. If those examples showed the impact of a timely reply, another place demonstrated the power of meticulous attention to detail. A hotel didn't view guests as people needing a room, but as people needing an experience. They tracked the smallest online comments about a pillow not being soft enough, a scent not being quite right, or a song being off-key. Then they adjusted, not just silently, but by sending a signal to the person who spoke that they had been heard. The staff there weren't anonymous servers. They were individuals empowered to go above and beyond when their intuition guided them. If someone expressed a desire to hear a different song, it would appear the next day. If someone mentioned an important date, a small surprise would be waiting in their room. This not only made guests appreciative, but also created stories for them to tell. These stories spread to people who had never set foot in that hotel, but began to yearn for the experience. And invisibly, that place became more than a hotel. It became a collective memory woven from private moments. This is the crucial point. In an age of overwhelming noise, what makes people believe is the trace of finesse, a small action with clear meaning. People often think only large businesses have the resources to do that, but in another corner, a small clinic proved the opposite. No large budget, no massive team, just a few individuals who chose to remember things no one required them to. They wished every patient a happy birthday. They answered oral health queries online. They sent well wishes when they knew someone was recovering. Each patient became an acquaintance, then a referrer. These actions weren't calculated, yet they carried more weight than entire campaigns. The clinic became a family's preferred choice, not because of its prime location or bright sign, but because of the feeling of closeness. That closeness created loyalty, which then spread as connecting threads, drawing in new people, little by little. Some don't need a long story, just a name, a consistent style, a decision to prioritize relationships is enough to prove that the right culture and genuine intent create a domino effect. When kindness is no longer a tactic but a habit, it reflects in every action, every interaction, and those around feel it instantly. Victory in the age of conversation doesn't come from the biggest players. It belongs to those who are most genuine, who are willing to step down to talk, to listen to the smallest hum, and are subtle enough to act for others when no one is asking. These places don't just sell products or services, they sell the feeling of being valued, and that is something humans have never stopped pursuing. Some once said that care was only suitable for soft, emotionally driven brands. Yet, real-life stories shatter that prejudice. Because even in the hotel industry, where experiences are often boxed into processes, it's precisely the small, off-script details that create the biggest resonance. Imagine someone walking into a grand lobby, beautiful lights, polished interiors, everything impeccably ordered. But what that person remembers isn't any of those things. It's the moment someone remembered them. A question prompted by a piece of information that staff could only have known if they had truly listened to what the guest had said elsewhere. It's as if a bridge connected the online and real worlds, where a past conversation became a present reality. These places use social media not as an advertising stage, but as a magnifying glass. They read every line of feedback as if it were a shared guest diary, then use it to adjust the smallest details. If someone once mentioned they preferred the scent of wood over flowers, they would change the room's fragrance before that guest returned. They didn't do this for ostentation, but so that the person would have a moment of realizing they had never been disregarded. The power of this isn't in the gift, it's in creating the feeling. Someone noticed me, even though I didn't ask. And when that happens, the relationship transcends the transaction. Guests will recount the story, sometimes with an almost disbelieving tone, and others will want to experience if it's true. Thus, resonance spreads in layers without needing to pay for it to be amplified. This is how the economy of gratitude integrates into the structure of business. It demands the empowerment of employees to act on their intuition. If they encounter an opportunity to make someone happy, they are allowed to do so immediately, without needing anyone's permission. Procedures are not meant to limit, but to support the inspiration to serve. When an individual feels approved, they cannot help but serve with their entire heart. But this isn't just for those with ample staff. In a small city, a humble clinic becomes an even more refined example. They don't have the budget to buy attention, but they possess something many larger entities lose: the time to see each patient as an acquaintance. They remember family names, send well wishes when a child loses a milk tooth, and answer questions they technically don't need to. They build their network not with advertisements, but with memories. And when patients refer each other, it's not a call based on offers or promotions, but the whisper of trust. Larger clinics might be envious, wondering how such a small place could capture the hearts of so many families. The answer lies not in statistics, but in the moment someone feels valued as a human being. Then there are individuals like a simple melody perfectly in tune. They work quietly but are present everywhere. People recount that if help is needed, they not only assist within their job scope but go beyond whenever possible. No poster proclaims this, it's simply what others tell. They are an illustration of a strange phenomenon. When a culture is deeply ingrained, good intent doesn't need to be shouted in slogans. It manifests in every action, big or small. Looking at all these pieces reveals a profound depth. Victory in the new era isn't a battle for who speaks loudest. It's a test of who listens most intently, not who is more ostentatious, but who makes others feel more valued. And this appears at every scale, in every industry, at every resource level. At the pinnacle of this realization is the sober understanding that any business can participate. There are no barriers for the small, no privileges for the giants. Everything starts with a small action, a timely reply, a subtlety that most overlook. That's why real-life examples carry more weight than theory. They remind us that if we are genuine, the world will respond. And once a business has experienced this, they cannot revert to old ways. They understand that advertising tactics are merely strings, while relationships are the foundation. Products may change, technology may shift, but human emotion retains its fundamental nature. If someone makes you feel cared for, you will stay and you will tell others. That is when the economy of gratitude is no longer an idea but an operating structure. Stories like Avaza, the burger place, the subtle hotel, the tiny clinic, and the quiet worker blend together as proof. Power lies in intentional kindness, repeated in many forms, and these very examples clarify a truth. In this era, the patient listener will become the leader. Going a bit further, we see these stories are not just illustrations, but mirrors reflecting how people operate in the new era. At the heart of every seemingly grand event, there is always just a small moment. A timely reply, the right attention, an action that surprises someone because they felt seen. Some might think this is just random luck, isolated examples that can't be replicated. But with enough observation, a red thread emerges. Whether it's a B2B telecom company, or a local eatery, a luxury hotel, or a small clinic, or even a quietly serving individual, all walk the same path. Prioritizing others, not with words, but with actions. Looking closely at that tiny clinic, we see something deeper. They couldn't use budget to excel, but they used the memory of their hearts. They transformed each patient into a familiar face, not through artificial intimacy, but through details that only an observant person would notice. A follow-up message after treatment, a gentle explanation about a child's fear of teeth scaling, a small gift appearing on an important day. That wasn't just service, it was how they defined respect. And then there are individuals, like a simple harmony, requiring no large company, no team of experts, just the right intent and the right culture. He works like flowing water, gentle yet persistent, unostentatious yet impactful. No one would say he's building a strategy. If asked, he would probably just say he's doing the right thing, and that very simplicity becomes the gold standard. When the culture is deeply ingrained, customer care is no longer a task but the deepest instinct. These examples demolish the old belief that power belongs to the budget. No, power belongs to those who are willing to do what others deem too insignificant to matter. A personalized thank you, a genuine response, a small adjustment based on a nuanced feedback. These things don't cost much money, but they demand something rarer: mindfulness. That is where many large businesses stumble. They have systems, they have processes, they have strategies, but they lack the space for their people to act for others. They frame care within forms, turning it into a performance where customers hear the voice but don't feel the heart. Meanwhile, small places win precisely because they don't need permission to care. So the true difference lies not in scale, but in the ability to execute intent. If good intent is not empowered, it dies prematurely. If culture doesn't support it, it becomes empty words. But if an organization nurtures it, it transforms into the brand's personality and spreads outward as something others can genuinely feel. Every story in this larger picture leads to one conclusion. In an age where everyone has a voice, what makes people fall silent and listen isn't a louder voice, but a closer one. When a business understands that victory comes not from manipulating attention, but from giving attention, they stop seeking the masses and begin seeking individuals. This is when the economy of gratitude becomes an operating model, no longer just a theory. It states that loyalty cannot be bought, only nurtured, that reputation cannot be built with slogans, only created through experience, that a brand is not something we own, but something others feel in every interaction with us. Upon realizing this, an organization steps into a different world. They no longer ask how to make people talk about them. They ask how to make people feel valued. This shift in questioning transforms their entire strategy, culture, and results. They stop building walls and start building bridges. They don't view customers as data, but as people with stories, memories, and a need to be heard. And precisely from that shift, the examples we've seen blossom. A contract arising from a small complaint, an eatery becoming a community icon, a hotel transforming into a place everyone wants to be remembered in. A clinic that never needed a large sign, yet always had a full waiting room. And an ordinary person becoming proof that culture can live in every simple action. All of this leads to a quiet truth. The new power belongs not to those who possess information, but to those who know how to respond, not to those who talk the most, but to those who make others feel seen. This era creates a strangely fair playing field. Anyone can win if they know how to use their heart as a strategy. A business understands this, practices it, and makes it a habit. They will no longer need to compete with noise, because others will naturally seek them out. Not because they are prominent, but because they are trustworthy. And in an ever-changing world, that value is more resilient than any other tool. And there are moments when numbers lie. Not because they are wrong, but because they don't tell the whole story. During the cold days on the East Coast, A struggling team, caught between failures and empty seats in the stands, tried something peculiar. They released invisible tickets on the city's digital map, attaching them to bars, gyms, and restaurants near the stadium. Anyone passing by, anyone observant, anyone curious, could convert a simple check-in into a real ticket. No fuss, no slogans, just a gamified lure. The initial results made people sneer. Only just over 15% of ticket holders actually came to the stadium. Cold-hearted journalists called it a failure. They sought a single number as proof and then closed the story as if it were complete. But there were other waves flowing beneath the surface. At that time, the team lost often, game days were unfavorable, and traffic was difficult. Yet, even under those circumstances, a portion of people still left their homes to watch. That was enough for those on the inside to understand that the experiment wasn't necessarily wrong. But what was more important lay beyond the stands. Those who hunted for tickets happily recounted their experience. They posted photos, they talked about the game, they showed off the gifts they received. The story spread not through billboards, but through the voices of the participants. Every critical article in the newspaper inadvertently made more people aware of the game. Earned media, quietly accumulating like frost on a window pane. And then there was a strange feeling. The campaign wasn't measured by the number of filled seats, but by what remained in the consciousness of the participants. They were happy, they told stories, they drew others into the conversation. A small experiment had peeled back the meaning of success. Sometimes the most valuable thing isn't in short-term results, but in how it changes the way people perceive you. Whoever only looks at an Excel sheet will call it a failure. Whoever understands the story will call it a foundation. From that slice, we enter the more complex realm of relationships. When businesses open up to converse with the world, the sounds they receive aren't always pleasant. There are jarring noises, people exploiting the customer-centric trend to make demands. They know that a loud enough complaint can be rewarded. This sometimes makes those on the front lines want to shut down to avoid meaningless drama. But this is the paradox of kindness. If you refuse to listen for fear of being exploited, the organization cuts off a part of its own soul. Therefore, one must maintain the moral high ground, still reply, still engage in dialogue, still show respect, but not always concede. The boundary needs to be set elsewhere, knowing when a conversation needs to end, knowing how to refuse without losing dignity. Caring doesn't equate to surrender in this new interaction zone. These challenges are like a test of steadfastness. Businesses must accept that in any village, there will be those who speak loudly, not because they are right, but because they know noise easily grabs attention. But don't be silent because of that. Silence merely gives others the power to define you. Dialogue is a duty, but understanding the foundation of dialogue is what protects us from manipulation. And then, as these exchanges lengthen, the truth emerges. What kills relationships isn't the complaint itself, but how we evade or react incorrectly to that complaint. People want to be recognized as human beings, even when they make excessive demands. Don't indulge them, but don't lose respect either. That is a delicate balance that only those who genuinely care can maintain. Finally, there's a cold, sharp layer of truth. Many enter this new world of dialogue still carrying old mindsets. They use social media like a megaphone, only broadcasting, never listening back. They jump in only when forced, treating it like a crisis extinguisher. They glamorize themselves, donning a veneer of superficiality, turning interaction into a press release. They only talk about themselves, never speaking like a real person standing alongside others. 7 mistakes are repeated in a vicious cycle. No strategy, just gimmicks, only appearing when there's a fire, boasting about themselves, issuing pronouncements, being lazy to create new content, constantly pushing products, and demanding immediate results. These errors aren't technical, they're rooted in mindset. They reflect a fear of genuine conversation, a space where people can ask, challenge, and expect to be responded to as individuals. Therefore, at the end of this road, the question is no longer how to attract attention, but what do I want to leave behind? Anyone who builds a business like a sandcastle, easily swept away by the wind when its builder leaves the stage, will refuse dialogue. But anyone who thinks about legacy will understand that how they treat people today is what will remain tomorrow. Reputation isn't found in what we say about ourselves, but in what others say about us when we are no longer there. So, learning to care isn't about selling, it's about building something that will outlast us. It forces us back to the oldest, yet most future-oriented, principle, respecting each individual. If someone disregards this, they will quickly disappear like fleeting noise. But who perseveres? They will become a story that others retell, not because they are perfect, but because they stayed when others walked away. Once we understand that numbers don't tell the whole story, we are compelled to look deeper into how the world unfolds in this new atmosphere. A complaint is not just a reaction, it's a signal. It reminds us that someone is waiting for someone to listen. But listening is not blind obligation. It's a double-edged sword. Faced with excessive demands, everyone at times feels manipulated. That feeling of distress isn't fictional, it's the reality for anyone in a relationship. But what makes this game different is how it's confronted. Genuine care doesn't avoid the noise, but it doesn't let the noise lead. Sometimes an organization needs to say, "I hear you," but it also needs to know when to say, "This is enough." That boundary is not a barrier, it's a sense of self-respect. Because if you concede endlessly, a business will quickly become a puppet in the hands of those who exploit generosity for profit. Nevertheless, another truth also emerges. Even when knowing one is being challenged by someone who only wants personal gain, kind behavior must still be maintained. Because this isn't a roundabout negotiation, it's a test of principles. If one gets caught up in petty squabbles, they will realize that what they preach about care is merely a veneer. Here, victory lies not in teaching them a lesson, but in staying true to what one believes. These thoughts pave the way for a larger realization. Many brands believed they were building relationships, but in reality, they were constructing a stage. They spoke loudly, repeated themselves, boasted of their achievements. They thought others had to be impressed, but the paradox is that the louder they spoke, the fewer people listened. There's a list of common mistakes that anyone observing long enough can clearly see. Some rush into social media not to understand, but to perform. They have no strategy, just a few trendy moves. Some only appear when there's a crisis, treating their presence like a fire extinguisher. Some turn social media into a self-mirror, praising themselves as if everyone should know. Some treat dialogue platforms like a press release board, posting words without needing a response. Some are lazy to create new content, just repeating others. Some use it tirelessly for selling, as if the world is a market and customers are walking wallets. And almost all make the mistake of wanting immediate results, like someone planting seeds today and demanding fruit tomorrow morning. These errors aren't due to a lack of tools, but a lack of attitude. They reflect a fear of being placed on equal footing with customers, a fear of losing control, a fear of hearing unpleasant things. Therefore, they built a stage to avoid the authentic playing field. But a stage shines for only a few minutes. The real playing field is where people stay long-term. If a brand only knows how to perform, it will eventually perform to empty seats. And then the quiet question appears. Do I want what I build to disappear with me, or stand strong even after I'm gone? That answer distinguishes pursuers of buzz from pursuers of legacy. Legacy is not created by brilliant campaigns, but by consistent behavior in unobserved moments. It is etched into others' memory by how we make them feel when they interact with us. If someone truly cares about what remains after them, they must see care as a foundation. When they treat each person as if that defines their culture, they no longer care much for instant applause because they understand the value of patience. Relationships need time, reputation needs emotional accumulation. Loyalty needs to be nurtured by repeated actions. The logic of this era intersects with human nature. Anyone who wants to build something long-lasting must accept that building is not about convincing, but about proving. It's not about telling others to believe, but about living in a way that makes others confident in what we do. And it all begins with small things. Responses that seem insignificant, yet plant deep roots in memory. When looking back at the stories we've told, from the virtual ticket campaign to the cries of the opportunist, to the mistakes of arrogant brands, we see an underlying current. In a world where everyone has a voice, power lies not in who speaks loudest, but in who makes others listen. And to be listened to, you must make them feel valued. This is the foundation of any legacy. It determines whether a business is a light that flashes and then fades, or a light that remains in someone's memory when the room is dark. And this cannot be bought with advertising. It can only be built by how we live each day. Reaching the end of that path, we realize a beautiful paradox in an era where technology amplifies voices. The most precious thing is what seems oldest, how we treat each person. There is no fast track, no button that creates instant trust. Trust only comes when others experience how we respond, especially when no one is watching. That is why seemingly small experiments like the virtual ticket game resonate so powerfully. Not because it filled empty seats, but because it showed a spirit that dared to try, dared to connect, dared to dialogue. People looked and felt that someone here was truly making an effort. And it is that feeling, not the numbers, that is the starting point of change. But if we only stop at quick reactions, everything will dissipate like smoke. What creates depth is the steadfastness of culture. That culture is tested by jarring complaints, manipulative actions, and situations that make us want to retreat. But perhaps that is why kindness has value. Because it is not easy, because it is not automatic, because it requires a choice. That choice creates the character of a person or a brand in the same way. Through these stories, we see a reflection of a larger realization. Any business that enters this new world of dialogue without changing internally will sooner or later reveal its true nature. If internally they still view customers as tools, they will use social media as a propaganda megaphone. If they fear being questioned, they will use it as a press release board. If they only want to sell, they will turn every conversation into a transaction. And then the dialogue channel becomes an empty stage, brilliant for a moment, but no one stays. Meanwhile, those who are genuinely sincere know that a relationship is not a performance, but an exchange. They don't just speak their piece, they listen. They don't just appear when a crisis needs saving, they are consistently present, like familiar neighbors in a small town. They don't boast about their values, they demonstrate their values through their actions. And then the strange thing happens. Others tell stories about them instead of them having to tell their own. That is earned media in its deepest sense, a story that others voluntarily spread. This cannot be forced, it can only be earned. And to be worthy requires something that modern business often undervalues, the ethical depth of how one treats others. At the end, this mindset suddenly expands beyond the scope of individual campaigns. It touches on a more human question: do I want what I create to stand strong after I am no longer here? If the answer is yes, then how we operate today is the material that will build what endures tomorrow. What we build is not a brand, but an impression in the hearts of others. If it is built with tricks, it will dissipate when the lights go out. If it is built with relationships, it will continue to be carried forward and spread by others. This is when one differentiates between tactics and qualities. Tactics are fast, qualities are durable. Tactics change with the seasons, qualities guide over the years. The examples we have seen in this journey, despite differing in industry, scale, and resources, are alike in one point: they chose quality. They didn't view kindness as a trick, but as their identity. And because of that, others trusted them right there. The lesson of this era becomes clearer than ever. Whoever wants a legacy must be serious about how they treat others, not in speeches, but in every small interaction. Not in advantageous times, but in difficult ones. Not with the masses, but with each specific individual. Every revolution, when stripped down, begins with a change in how we understand people. This revolution is no different. It shifts from viewing customers as targets to viewing them as people with memories and emotions. This demands that businesses relearn a simple, yet forgotten, thing: true respect. As this journey concludes, looking back at these seemingly fragmented pieces, we see them coming together to form a unified principle. True value lies not in the performance, but in the trace left in the hearts of others. In an era where everyone has the means to speak, power shifts to the one who makes the listener feel seen. And that is what creates the silent, yet enduring legacy of any entity that dares to live by it. As this narrative closes, what still resonates in the mind is not strategies or minor tricks, but a question so simple it is unsettling: how do we truly treat others? It turns out that the most ordinary thing, care, is the most fertile ground, yet the hardest to sustain. Everyone says they care. But how many patiently live by that every day? Especially when no one is watching, no one is applauding. The stories we've explored are like polished pebbles. A timely response can alter a business's destiny. A subtle action can become a collective memory. A small clinic can triumph over large chains simply by remembering each person's name. And a quiet individual doing the right thing can leave a resonance that outlasts any advertisement. The biggest lesson here isn't a sales formula, but a hard truth. A culture of care isn't something to decorate, it's the foundation of resilience. Perhaps you're also asking yourself, in a world where everyone is in a hurry and everything has a price, is there still room for selfless kindness? This story answers yes, but at a cost. Genuine care will make you more vulnerable, more exploitable, more prone to disappointment. The strange thing is that these very risks create value, because only those who dare to suffer loss first are trusted later. And in an age where reputation can change overnight, trust is what few have the patience to build. So if we had to distill everything into a single core idea, perhaps it would be this: the future belongs to the fiercely kind. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is discipline. It is choosing to respond even when tired. It is anticipating dissatisfactions. It is choosing to listen instead of lecturing. It is daring to believe in the most fragile thing in business human emotion and, paradoxically, that fragility endures the longest. But instead of just reflecting in silence, try applying it to yourself. If you are building a community, a business, or simply your personal brand, what are you nourishing it with? Are you building a stage or a real relationship? Have you ever replied to an anonymous message just out of respect, knowing there was no benefit? Have you ever realized that public praise is much easier than remembering someone when they are silent? And deeper still, are you brave enough to treat unpleasant complaints with calm instead of defensiveness? These questions don't need quick answers, but if they make you slightly uneasy, that's a good sign. They indicate that you have understood the core of this narrative. True care always begins with an honest, uncomfortable self-reflection.